going, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Scales and Tails Podcast, your favorite swimbait podcast, maybe your favorite or maybe your favorite podcast altogether. We are joined by Mr. Mike Miller up there for episode 177 today, up there in Washington State. There for a while, well, it feels like a long time ago, but it may not have been. We were in Washington a lot, talking to all the Washington anglers up there, some of the Canadian anglers up that way, and it's been a little while since we've talked to anybody up there. So I'm very excited to talk to Mike today. Talk to him about some crazy fishing he got to experience last year for a stint of time. He is not like primarily or not primarily, he's not a complete swim bait guy like maybe some of you guys are. So we're going to kind of hear him break down some of his waterways and what makes him decide to go out and fish the softie or the crawler outside of his normal conventional stuff and that sort of thing. So it's going to be a super good episode, and it's not going to be directly all swim bait stuff. We'll kind of hear Mike and hear his thought process any given day he goes out. But as always, Mike, before we get too deep into the episode, we're going to get the icebreakers out of the way, get our feet a little wet in this conversation, so we're a little comfortable, more comfortable talking to each other, and get to know you a little bit outside of the little intro you'll give us here after the fact. So. First question for you, man. The usual. Everybody knows it by now. We're getting ready to go fish in the morning. We got to stop at the gas station. Got to get gas for the boat or gas for the truck on our way out there. What are the gas station essentials you're usually picking up before a trip?
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, Adrian. I'd say when I'm stopping at the gas station, I'm getting my Monster, my white Monster, probably a big water and some spit sunflower seeds.
Mm,
Usually pack some other snacks with me, like a PB&J always saves
yeah.
the day, but those are my go-tos for sure.
Yep. I was about to say the water is usually the common. Most guys always say at least a water. If they don't pack one from home, they buy one of those like huge like $1.15 water bottles from the gas station. And Monster, I can't. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but there's been a handful of guys now already with these questions. But I don't know if anybody has mentioned a Monster. I know that is a very common theme and a common energy drink that a lot of guys drink, but I think you may be one of the first ones that have said a Monster. So you have reserved the right to be the first guy to mention Monster in that icebreaker question.
Thanks.
And then the second question, which we always kind of more so gear towards the guest, and this will be a question that we can touch on right now, and then we'll touch on it later in the episode. But for anybody who doesn't know, up there in Washington, you guys have some good fishing, and you got to experience some really good fishing there for a certain period of time last year. There for maybe a couple weeks through towards the end of the year, where you caught a lot of really good fish in that that timeline. So what was that like for you? And do you think, just kind of glaze over it, do you think you'll get to maybe have that same type of events line up this year? Do you hope?
Of course, I hope so. You always want to go out there on a mission and
Yeah.
nail a big fish. Um, this lake that I had just moved into a different part of the county, and there were a number of smaller lakes that didn't get a lot of pressure, mainly because they were electric motor only lakes, and a lot of the bass boats and stuff can't get on them. So that
Mhm.
leaves guys like me that have kayaks, free reign to these lakes that are mostly pressured by trout fishermen. And when you know that a lake gets stocked with trout, those bass that are in there, there's going to be some big fish in there eating those trout. So um, I had actually hit this one particular lake about a year ago before I had moved down to this part of the county, and kind of went out there on a whim, not really knowing much about the lake other than it was a more clear lake, good visibility with like more of a rocky bottom, which in these parts you don't find that much. Most of the lakes are pretty stained up with a soft bottom. So I went out there and did a lap, didn't get a bite, and I said, "Well, this lake sucks, so I'm probably not going to hit it again." Fast forward to the end of August this year, I had a buddy to say, "Hey, man, you need to go hit that lake again. Like, you know that there's got to be some monsters in there." So that's what I did. I took like a Friday morning and went out there in my kayak the end of August. And the week prior to that, my buddy Ian, he's one of the bait makers with Spency Swim Baits with Austin, and he had given me one of their new crawlers that they just came out with last summer. I'd never fished a crawler before, but obviously the concept of it seemed pretty enticing to me. Like it would definitely have some drawing power for some bigger fish. So about 15 minutes into launching, um, casting that crawler up into shallower water around docks, and boom, the surface blows up. And I knew right away it was a big fish or a better fish. And it didn't take long to get it up to my kayak, and it got it in the net, and it was a 703. And I was super stoked on that, because it was my second fish I had caught on that bait.
Yeah.
And so, your confidence goes to the roof when you nail a big fish on any bait, let alone a brand new bait that you get. So that was awesome. And I was just stoked for those guys because they put a lot of hard work into their baits. So then it was kind of a lot of my fishing excursions or have time windows of just a few hours to get out and then I got to go. But, later on in that day, I nailed a couple threes and fours on it, and then I had to split. So I was like, all right, this is awesome. I need to get back out here again and fish the rest of the lake, cover some water with it, and see what I can find. So a couple of days later, I set out at probably 6:37 at night with a couple more hours to fish till it got dark. And I was probably 45 minutes into that session, and I made a long cast, from deeper water up by a dock. And I, knew where there's some down trees in the water, so I had a feeling, those could be good homes for some fish, right?
Right. Yep.
So bringing that bait in, the crawler, and surface blows up, and I knew right away it was a giant because the way it was pulling, it was digging on me like crazy, and I usually fish with my drag pretty tight, so it made some runs like I'd never experienced before, and I got it up, and it was a new PB for me at 8 pounds 12 ounce. And like that feeling when you get a fish like that in the net is just like, oh man, you can't beat it with those adrenaline shakes. It is kind of surreal in the moment. And instead of kept fishing, I just like was like, all right, I got some photos, some videos of it, put her back in. And then I just was like, I got to get off the water. I got to go digest this. So that was a pretty special for me in itself. Um, and then the very next day, I got off work a little bit early. It was a Friday. It's a bluebird day. Uh, no wind. So I was thinking, well, I'm not going to be doing top water at 2 in the afternoon, with it being so still and quiet. I actually had Ian on the phone with me on speakerphone. He was kind of giving me some reconnaissance about the night before when he had been out on that exact same lake. And I'm fishing docks with a drop shot wacky rig Cinco. And I tossed that right up in about a 1 foot window of this shallow dock, probably up in a foot and a half of water. But you just make a fish cast and you thread the needle. And I'm slowly pulling that out, and boom, fish on. At first, I didn't know how big it was. It felt like it had some weight. Um, it comes screaming out right straight at me, and it jumps about 2 feet from my kayak, like a foot in the air, shaking its head. And I'm like, holy shit, Ian, I got another giant on.
Yeah.
So I get that in the net, and that was an 8 pound 7 ounce northern
Oh my
strain.
gosh.
Like, man, this is incredible, right? So again, took some photos, sent her on her way. Um, about I'd say 4 days later, I'm out there again. I'm just trying to nail this lake as much as I can. Nail a 6'5" uh, largemouth on a SV3 spinnerbait. It was a windy day, some good chop to the water. Whenever it's like that, I automatically think, like a Citizen Six uh, with like an underspin or a
Hmm.
spinnerbait. I have confidence in those. So, uh, yeah, I was stoked to get another 6'5" out of that same body of water. So of course I got to keep going back out there, um, probably 3 days later. So this is all within about 10 days of each other, all these fish. I'm out there. It's another kind of breezy, sunny day, putting in some work out there. I've been out there a couple hours. I see this point, and I know that there's a couple laydowns and about 10 feet of water off this point. So I was making some long casts, and my second cast off that point, I hook up and with the SV3 spinnerbait again and nail a 7 pound, 14 ounce largemouth. And these fish, man, like, the object is to keep them in the water because bad things happen when they come out of the water, of course. But these fish were just getting acrobatic on me, and just to see like a big fish like that up here, head shaking out of the water, jumping and stuff is just amazing. So I got that one in the net, and there were some neighbors on the dock right in front of me when I caught it, so they were all cheering for me and got a couple pictures of it. Uh, well, they took some pictures for me and let her go. And so within like 10 days, I got about 38 pounds worth of fish, 5 fish, um, on that lake. So that was pretty incredible for me, being my PB before even hitting that lake was 7 pound, 13 ounce from 2021. So it was a really, really good end of summer for me, to say the least. But
Right, yeah, dude, absolutely crazy. And we'll kind of talk about maybe some what your future plans are for that spot this year. But before we get too crazy deep into all this stuff, let us hear kind of what your introduction to fishing was, how you got into it, and just kind of what it was like for you growing up, like if you were into fishing when you were younger or not till later, kind of however it all started for you.
well, I was born and raised in North Bend, Washington, which is a small foothill community of the Cascade Mountains. So we had a lot of rivers that flew, or one river system, three forks of it that flowed through our town. So, growing up, we were always hitting those rivers for trout, mainly cutthroat trout. My dad was grew up in North Dakota and spent a lot of time in Minnesota, so he was always a fisherman and introduced that to my brother and I. So he'd take us down to the river. We'd spend hours, wading, finding pools behind rocks and catching trout. And I think that really, like, you develop like intuition on where do you think fish hold as a young man, trying to catch these trout.
Hmm.
There's quite a few little bass lakes in the Snoqualmie Valley that we'd take our little John boat out and hit. Use floating Rapalas or just night crawlers. Really, like I didn't care what I was using. I just wanted to use something that I knew what would catch fish. And my brother's out a very very good fisherman. He's one of those guys. If there's one fish in the lake, he'll catch it. And so I got from him actually, just going out. Fishing for bass, fishing for trout, fishing for salmon and steelhead. Um, and like throughout, our like high school, me and some buddies were still into bass fishing a little bit. We'd mainly go out in springtime and trying to find beds, to, target bigger fish doing
Yeah.
that. But I never really like developed a sense of like, you know, a feel for a lot of different baits really. I mostly would throw on a split shot and use a night crawler around docks, and catch fish that way just because why not use the real thing? But
Hmm.
uh, so yeah, like in high school, we fished quite a bit, but after high school, we actually really got into walleye fishing. We go over to Eastern Washington, get Potholes Reservoir and Banks Lake and Lake Roosevelt, and we'd get out and bottom bounce for walleye. And we do a little bit of bass fishing, but it's kind of like we're trying to get, food on the table really with walleye because they're such
Yeah.
good eating fish. So, yeah, it wasn't until probably 2020, we started getting those stimulus checks. And I'm like, man, I need to get a kayak or something.
Hmm.
So that's what I did with one of those checks. I got an Old Town topwater paddle version. And I was actually working in a town that was really about 5 minutes from this really big, pretty popular bass lake here in Western Washington. And I they had big public docks, and we had fished this lake quite a few times for smallmouth and largemouth, but it had been a while since I had actually gotten out there and kind of rediscovered my love for bass fishing. And so before work, I'd get up at 4:30 and go out on this dock and use a slip bobber and night crawler to try to, find fish. And sure enough, I nailed like a 4 pound largemouth up in like 5 feet of water. And I was like, oh my gosh, and I caught on like, an ultralight spinning rod. So the fight was really good. I was like, man, I can get used to this. So I started kind of digging more into like what should I use? Like like Senko's obviously will catch anything, but so I started hitting that area of this lake before work. I started catching more bass. I started exploring the shoreline where the more I researched on like what good bass habitat is, like there's a weed line in about 10 to 15 feet of water. And I was thinking, all right, it's a gravel bottom, a nice thick weed line. This is a fishy spot. So I started just going out, hitting these spots, from the bank or these docks. And I started finding really good fish and the addiction started. So I guess that's kind of a gist of like from when I was young to just a few years ago to where it all started.
Right. Yeah, dude, when I think Washington, maybe it's hypocritical. I always think steelhead, like the trout fishing, obviously. And I didn't know until recently, until I had Garrett on, that the walleye fishing out there is such a huge scene. Like being from Michigan, obviously, I know like walleye fishing is huge, but I see it more as like a Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, like Ohio's like scene because obviously we have the Great Lakes and all these little pothole lakes here have walleye and stuff in them. I didn't realize just how big the walleye fishing was out there. And so it's funny that you mentioned that because I don't know, for some reason I just was never keyed in on the walleye fishing scene out there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of like killer walleye fisheries in eastern Washington, really, and then obviously you have the Columbia River that holds giants in there, um, that runs through eastern Washington. But yeah, we did spend a lot of time over there in like really good areas for bass, but we were kind of more focused on trying to catch walleye, which are a lot of fun, but in my opinion, they're not the fighters. They don't
Wet
hold a
sock.
candle to bass fish. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I mean,
so
there are a lot.
right, yeah. So it's funny that you kind of started off like with like trout was kind of more so the introduction to it, and then it was walleye, and then up until recently it was you kind of getting into bass fishing more so. And it like I'm sure you can like attest to it that during COVID there was a lot of people who got back into fishing or got into fishing altogether. Like it was a crazy surge from like the numbers that I've seen like fishing licenses sold like in 20 and 21 compared to like 2015 and 2014. Like the amount of outdoor recreation that happened during COVID is absolutely insane, and the amount of like sales and stuff that there was is just through the roof. And now you're kind of starting to see it level back out a little bit because people are like, oh, I don't need to go fish now, or I don't have time to fish, or whatever else it may be. But I feel like the people who stuck with it are more so kind of like really in tune with it now. Like they're like, okay, yeah, this is like my hobby's gonna be for the rest of the time, like everybody else now.
Yeah, and I'm almost thankful that that all went down in a way, because otherwise, I don't know if I would have gotten so involved in the bass fishing if I hadn't like uh gone and got this kayak and
Hmm.
like upgraded to a pedal version the year later because I realized that I needed a way to fish hands free.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure, it definitely like gave me something to do when there wasn't a whole lot to do during that year. And like it was that same year actually where I created a fish brain and stuff, and I was started catching some nicer bass, and I was making some posts, and a guy named Bob Sutter, who he's the Red Tops Worms
Oh yeah.
bait
Yep.
maker. He reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey man, if you're looking for like a good bass lake, we actually lived. Bob and I lived about 10 minutes from each other at that time. He's like, if you're looking for a good bass lake, go here. Like, I'll show you where to go. blah, blah, blah. I was like, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much. And so he and I connected and started chatting. And then, he started telling me, he's like, have you ever used, like a wake bait or anything like that? I'm like, no, like I use top water, like whopper ploppers or frogs or whatever. And so he's like, hey, how about you swing by my house one day and I'll show you what that's about. And I was like, all right, cool. So I did. I got over there, and he just had like a plethora of different big baits. I was like, holy cow, man, that's amazing that fish will even eat these things. And so he's like, he put me to get together a little like care package, right, to get me started. He threw in like a Citizen 6, a Citizen 7, one of his wake baits. It was like a gill wake and like a rat, and just some other things. He just was like wanted to see me like succeed at some things, I guess. So I give Bob like probably all the credit to get me into swim bait fishing because that totally put a fire under my butt to like go out and throw these wakes around. And like I started, I let's see, in 2021 I was out on that lake where I'd go in the morning, before work, and I nailed like a 5.5 pound largemouth on his wake. And I was like, man, this is like the biggest bass I've ever seen. And there's a guy that I had met at work that was a tournament bass fisherman. And so he was kind of like uh, someone I looked up to, right? Because it was something I was really interested in. And I sent him a photo of this, 5.5 pound largemouth I caught, and I was expecting some praise or something like whatever. And
Yeah.
his reply was, "Keep climbing the ladder." And I was like, "What does that mean?" Like, but I started thinking about it. I'm like, "Yeah, that you're right. Like, that's a nice fish, but there's so much bigger fish out there. Like, keep climbing the ladder." And that's something like I always think about, like even if you do nail like a fish that's almost nine or whatever, like there's tens out there, there's bigger fish, there's what do you have your eyes on? And that kind of like motivates me is, you can always find a bigger fish. It's all about where you cast, what kind of body of water you're fishing, and all that. So those are some things that like I guess resonated with me. And Bob Sutterth, I give a lot of credit to because, he didn't have to give me that care package of swim baits that got me going.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you got that care package, was that were you kind of fishing like the Senko and spinner baits at the time, or did that kind of get you away from the live bait and kind of more into the artificial stuff more so?
When I like took the leap into more artificial stuff
Right,
because like
yeah.
I didn't have confidence in a Cinco, for instance. And so I went and bought like the essentials. Like pumpkin green Cinco is the ticket, in my opinion. If you need to catch a fish in the summertime, at least, it's probably going to catch you a fish. But I I got I there was this lake up in the Snoqualmie Valley that I knew about that had folklore had some big fish in it, and I met a guy through work who actually lived on that lake, and so I was able to get his number, and he's like, "Yeah, man, come. I've got a little John boat with a Minn Kota on it. Come take it out whenever you want." So I was like, "All right, heck yeah." So I went up to this guy's house, took his boat out, and I hadn't used a Citizen 6 ever in my life, but I did a little research, and all I had was a 7 foot medium power St. Croix spinning rod. And so I lined that up with 20-pound Power Pro and used like a 15-foot leader of 15-pound P line, tied on that Citizen 6, and just started throwing it around. And I think my second trip out there, I nailed like a 4 pound largemouth by this laydown. And I was like, all right, there's my confidence, right? And like 15 minutes later, I'm going around the lake and I hook a giant. And I'm like, it head shook and it spit the hook. I was like, holy crap, all right, this is what I'm after. These are the fish that I want to find. And I knew that these bigger baits are going to have the drawing power to find those fish. So I kept hammering that lake that fall and ended up catching let's see, like probably a couple weeks later, I nailed a 6 pound, 12-ounce largemouth on a that same Citizen Six. And then on Halloween day, it was a cold bluebird day, super calm. I remember I cast it under this dock and fish nailed it, and it was a 7 pound, 13-ounce largemouth. And like to be able to stick some fish like that, on a bait that you're just getting used to, it's hard to put the bait down after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Was it like crazy to see these fish eating this, at the time it was a decent sized bait for you for like kind of getting into it like right off the bat. Were you surprised that you were having success with it essentially right away?
yeah, actually, because like you don't know what you don't know, and I was like, all right, well, I was totally watching a lot of the YouTube videos and uh, just trying to find all the information on like how to use these things, like what speed to reel them at, like with a spinning rod, it was a little different, right? Because I now know that there are different, better setups to use. But yeah, it definitely turned the light switch on in my brain. Like, if you want to catch big fish, more than often, these baits will definitely attract those bigger fish. So,
Right. Yeah. And so was it hard for you? Because I guess the thing is like when guys notice that they're like, oh man, when I fish the Citizen Six or whatever it may be, I'm catching bigger fish, but maybe not as many fish as I would on a Senko or a spinnerbait or whatever else it is. Was it, were you kind of, so when that happens, I feel like guys fall into the sense of, oh, I'd rather catch one big fish every 5 trips than a bunch of small fish. So they kind of just, sell their soul and fish the swim bait all the time. Was that something that happened to you, or were you kind of more of an open mindset pretty much the whole time and realized that it was more so a tool rather than like just a constant thing for you?
yeah, I didn't put it down, man. I was like, I would rather catch, or at least try to catch bigger fish than try to catch ones and twos and threes, like once you catch a bigger fish, the feeling you get from that and the fight you get is like non-comparable. So I I used that bait. I didn't switch over. I didn't fish anything else other than really the Citizen Six that fall. And then up into that spring, I started diving into the tackle hole of, jackhammer chatterbaits and different like SV3 spinner baits and stuff, fish that or baits that I know or saw would catch good fish, And then I did apply those to my arsenal for sure, and uh, did start having some success with these other baits. But for the most part, in like 2022 and 23, I was trying to force feed these bigger baits because I didn't really have the desire to catch smaller fish.
Mhm.
But then as like my fishing style has changed, like I learned more about, what where to throw chatter baits and spinner baits and like jerk baits, what application to use and what type of conditions to use those in that could probably catch a fish compared to maybe a bigger bait.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah,
And I guess at the time, did you know that like you live in a crazy spot for like trout stock? Like obviously you know that there was trout and stuff in your area, but did you ever notice or when did you notice that those trout kind of correspond to being bigger bass in water compared to spots that don't have it? And did you like ever think of them being like a primary food source for big bass?
like it didn't really even like cross my mind up until the last 3 years. And I was lucky enough to like connect with a couple guys who were experienced swim bait fishermen up here in the Northwest, and they were gracious to me to let me pick their brains, and like they shed a knowledge to me that I had no clue about. Like Daryl Donarski, for instance, he's been very influential on like my fishing game because he shared a lot of knowledge with me that he didn't have to, but he knew that I had a passion for this. And so it kind of changed the way I thought about fishing lakes that are stocked with trout and stuff. You know, they'd say match the hatch. Well, we'll use like a anything that mimics any type of trout bait, right? Like a Huddleston, for instance.
Hmm.
But yeah, now like for sure, I have such a different mindset when I'm going out on the lake. Like I'm evaluating like what the water looks like, what's on the bank, like my underwater structure, you know, like what I'm going to throw there at that time given the conditions. Um, Absolutely.
Yeah, and like it's crazy that like especially being a guy who's familiar with trout like, you were and kind of I was, when you hear about that, you think, "Oh my gosh, like I never thought that these bass were kind of necessarily gorging themselves on these trout." But after you maybe catch a bass or two in trout waters, you're like, "Oh, this makes a lot of sense. These fish are completely built different from these other fish that I catch in other lakes that don't have trout." And then that's kind of like when the wheels start turning and when you're looking at swim baits, you're like, oh man, this looks kind of like a trout. Like I bet you this will get demolished if I present it the right way in these specific waters that kind of have these trout, and I can, essentially go after a trophy class fish here. And when I figured that out, and I'm sure kind of same for you, once you figure that out, it like you kind of go crazy for a little while. Like you want to go and you want to present this stuff every single trip. But after like then man, I don't know like what it was like for you, but once I figured that out, I wanted to fish these spots every single day, but then I kind of think to myself, I don't want to necessarily burn these bites out because I'm like over pressuring these spots.
And I feel like that did happen to me on certain little lakes that I was fishing. Like even if it was a wake bait or whatever, like I'd catch some nice fish on it,
Hmm.
but I was still, you know, uh, not putting that like like a Wade Hogs or Wade 3. I was using those quite a bit, which I still they're one of my confidence baits. Um, but like I realized that like I'm just not getting very many blowups anymore on these baits when I should be, you know. So then that's when I figured out, oh, it's time to switch up the presentation, give them something different. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it to be said for these small lakes that get trout stockings that they are absolutely built different. They're absolute footballs. They're short and fat, and it's obviously they're gorging themselves on trout or whatever bait fish are in that lake.
Right, exactly. How long was it after you got that citizen and started catching these fish and kind of got this, essentially a care package? How long was it until you started to look and invest in like a quote unquote like a traditional swim bait setup?
Yeah, I think it was that next spring I bought an iRod Genesis, and that was like my swim bait rod um, for like citizens. And I caught a lot of good fish on that rod. Actually, it was a really good rod. I actually just broke it this last year, but and then for like bigger baits, I was like, well, I need like a bigger rod, so I got a F5 Ghost Code for like throwing uh like toxic baits or uh my Sensi swim baits, Kairu crawler, for instance. Like I like that rod a lot. But I really don't. I have two swim bait rods, and then I like my Mega Bass rods and my Dobbins rods. I replaced that uh, I rod with a Dobbins Fury swim bait rod, and I really like. That's what I caught uh, my PB on last year, and I really like that rod. So I have a couple swim bait rods. The rest are like Dobbins, like Champions and Furies that I like to do my conventional stuff with.
Right, yeah, yeah. So when
Pretty
when you figured out the swim bait stuff and like you kind of maybe you realize the pros and cons behind it, is that when you kind of resorted back to being a more so like a well-rounded angler, like where you're like, okay, I'm gonna bring the pack of worms, I'm gonna bring the spinner bait and maybe a jerk bait, but I'm also gonna have my swim baits in case I feel like that's something that they're kind of falling into today. Like how did that all happen for you? Because like I said, some guys are not necessarily trapped, but there's still guys who think I have to fish the swim bait. It's got to be in my hands 24/7. And you, like we talked about, are somebody who isn't necessarily of that mindset, 100% of the time. So how did that all, like, how did you kind of shake that swim bait bug essentially and become like I said, a well-rounded angler?
Well, I knew that, there's a for any given condition, like for me, I want to have my wake bait, I want to have a soft swim bait, and then I want to have a spinner bait, and then I'm always going to have like or spinner bait or a jackhammer, and then my Cinco rod, right? Because
Mhm.
there's different areas on a lake that if there's a nice deep dock where I can guarantee a nice fish is sitting under, I'm gonna skip a Cinco back in there and see if there's a fish in there. And if I can't get a Cinco bite, throw on a jig or
Mm.
something more finessey, you know. But it all came down to, yeah, I want to catch big fish, but also I want to catch fish too. And so I obviously resorted to those few setups that usually, if there's a fish around, I have confidence that they're going to find or provoke a bite.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I love finesse fishing. It's fun to me, and it's fun to catch bigger fish on lighter gear. I feel like I can work docks and boat slips and stuff like that a lot better just with my skill level. Um, with my Dobbins Fury, Dobbins Champion, like I can make better, more effective casts with those and try to find where the fish are compared to a big swim bait where,
Mhm.
yeah, if you can get under there or whatever, then more power to you. But just the way I fish, I feel more confident doing that.
Right. Yeah. And you've kind of talked about the stuff that you fish a lot of the time and everything, outside of maybe the Senko is kind of fast-paced stuff. Are you the type of guy who zips around all the docks and then fishes like, cover and structure and stuff, or are you kind of a slower guy who picks apart everything and may only get to fish half the lake throughout the day?
My mindset when I'm out fishing, like I don't want to waste my casts, right? I want to
Hmm.
make high fishing fish water that isn't dead, and I think a lot of that comes with just spending time on the water, like evaluating the water you're fishing. Like, you can look at the bottom of some area and be like, there aren't fish in here,
Right.
but if I find a spot that I feel like is fishy, like I don't use electronics, so I guess my options are limited as far as going out offshore. But like if I find a spot that I feel like there's going to be a fish holding in that area, I'm going to probably pound it with a few different presentations. And if not, I'm out of there. But I would say I fish certain areas really slow and take my time. And then there's other areas I just bypass and I'm not going to waste my time, even though that could bite me in the butt. Who knows? Like,
Hmm.
but as far as like my experience now, fishing a lot of different water, like I have a pretty good idea, I feel like, of where there's fish and where there aren't.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And so like obviously especially when you break down these lakes like you've been talking about, you can really hone in. I mean, Gilbert talks about it in a couple of his episode or a couple of his videos like where like, hey, this dock never has a fish on it. It's a sandy bottom and it's only 5 feet deep. I'm gonna skip this one and I'm gonna go to the next one, or I'm gonna skip these five, go to the next one, however it is, and it makes it like super efficient, especially for a guy who's in a kayak who can't, zip around the whole lake and fish every single spot in a timely manner. Like you can skip the spots that you know don't have fish and stop at all the good spots and like really have a solid milk run so you can pick apart a 200-acre lake in a matter of 3.5 hours rather than fish every single dock on that 200-acre lake over the course of 5.5 hours. It becomes like super efficient, and that I think that makes guys maybe not necessarily better anglers but better like map readers. Like if you can determine why fish don't set up somewhere, you can make correlations throughout the lake on why fish do or don't set up in other spots as well, and that just goes to save you more time in the long run.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like I have always like for a while, like the last few years, like I've always had like maybe 4 or 5 hours of fish, right? So I'm not going to waste my time on areas that I don't feel confident that there's going to be fish there, you know? So, um, not wasting your cast has always resonated in my mind that like I'm going to go where I know there's underwater structure and it's more so that I've like done my research and been out there on the water evaluating things. And I don't know, like when I'm out there I feel like I get in this zone of like I am on the hunt, and I um try to focus on those areas that, if there's a drop off into deep water with some structure on it, seems like a pretty fishy area, and I'm going to spend my time, on that area. And I don't want to waste my time in other areas for sure. But
Yeah.
it is you a more efficient fisherman, there's no doubt.
Hmm. And then even over the course of the last couple of years of you fishing, I'm sure you've gotten to the point where you can maybe not necessarily diagnose a bite, but once you figure out that, hey, these fish are sitting on these specific docks because the way the sun is set up or whatever else, that even kind of tunes it in even more where you know how to present the bait and stuff. And when you have days like that, you can really just maybe not necessarily wreck the fish, but you can make the most out of the time on the lake. Like you were saying, getting to fish after work or before work or a couple hours here and there. Like if you can figure that stuff out and stay on a bite over the course of time, like that makes the couple trips that you get to make a week or a month so much more efficient and not like obviously just so much more fulfilling too. And so then when you go out, you can decide if you want to fish all swim baits because this is kind of how it's set up 2 weeks ago when I was here, or maybe leave the swim bait, maybe bring a handful of swim baits and worry about the spinner bait or the Senko or whatever else it may be. So like the longer you put in, obviously, like I just feel like it, even if you don't try, you become way more effective on every side of the whole angling thing.
Absolutely. There's a chapter in Pursuit of Giant Bass in Bill Murphy's book that actually Bob Sudarth gave me in that care package, which was awesome. But I've spent a lot of time like reading that book and just maybe different chapters that apply to me more. But he talks about the fisherman's intuition, and
Hmm.
like that only comes from time on the water and like you really focusing and evaluating the water that you're fishing, and I think it definitely helps to put the time in so you're not wasting your time. Like the whole objective is to catch a fish, right?
Yeah.
And the bigger the better.
Yeah,
So
and excuse me, when like I said, if you can just signify or simplify it the most you can, it just makes it so much nicer. Especially being on a kayak like you are, you can't bring 50 rods like somebody on a bass boat can, there's just so much that you can't necessarily do in your given circumstances. But also kind of going back and kind of talking about like the super crazy couple weeks you had there with the drawbacks, there's also positivity or like positives that come from it too, because you can access spots. So out there and even out east, the electric lakes are a super big thing. But here, to my knowledge, there's not really a thing like there's a quote unquote like horsepower restriction on all the inland lakes. But as long as you're not out there dicking around, it's never like really too enforced by the DNR. But like where you guys have that stuff, being a kayak guy and like just having the simple knowledge of maybe how a lake can set up or how similar lakes set up and having baits that these fish have never seen before, like that puts you in a category of kind of where you see yourself of being able to go out there and just making the most out of your time and catching a bunch of really high trophy class fish in your area. And you think about it, like how many other lakes are there around you, like within an hour and a half to 2 hour span, that there's other guys that go out and do that on those lakes, or even lakes that you've never even heard of or have gotten to explore yet, that you could most likely go out and do the same thing to. Like it's kind of crazy to think about.
I have thought about that, and there's some little lakes like that on my radar for this spring where like last gosh, it was early July. Like there was this small lake and it was the same deal. It was electric only and got trout stockings. I'm like, all right, well, I've never fished this lake. I got to get out there and check it out. So I did, and man, like it was early July and these fish were still, some of them were still on beds, which was pretty late for up here.
Yeah.
But I had never ever seen so many big bass cruising in my life. And it's a deeper lake, but it's just like very clear. And I'm thinking in like two outings, I counted probably 10 plus fish that had to have been, you know, 6, 7 pounds plus. And they're
Hmm.
deeper fish, but I was blown away. And I hooked one of them and it snapped me off. Like it was a really big fish. It was under a dock, but I did catch a couple fives out of there. And then literally after that, like I fished it a few more times during the summer, and the big fish were nowhere to be found. And obviously they're probably offshore somewhere. But yeah, like that lake, for instance, there's you go to a new lake, you see them. Now it's like, okay, how do I find them and how do I catch them? But I guarantee there are, quite a few other small lakes like that that just get trout pressure, and
Hmm.
it's a kayak fisherman's advantage to get out there and find them with for sure these bigger baits that they probably have never seen before. So I am excited for that, no doubt.
Yeah. Do you have like a little group of guys that kind of all discuss the fishing throughout different parts of your area? So, like, is there guys who are maybe boat anglers who talk about like, hey, fished this lake today, it wasn't the best, caught maybe a couple, and then you kind of like everybody gives a little report, or are you kind of more so like a solo guy who just teeth to the grindstone. You go fish this lake. Okay, well, this lake sucked today. Maybe I'll come back in 2 weeks, but I'm going to go fish this other lake tomorrow morning type of guy.
I definitely have a couple buddies who live in the same area I do that they have smaller boats, but they definitely fish the same lakes, and we talk about the fish we've caught or seen, um, you know, and we share knowledge about that because it's kind of fun to have other guys that know exactly the same water you're fishing and how they fish it compared to yourself.
Hmm.
And I'm lucky enough to have a couple buddies that do have bass boats that I'll go out on bigger lakes and get out and do that, fish for smallies and stuff on. But there's a handful of guys that I trust around here that are good dudes and know their stuff, and I trust what they say as far as like sharing knowledge and talking about their experiences out on the water for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When what was I
A
gonna say?
little lake with bass in it, you kind of want to keep it on the hush, right?
Yeah.
So
100%.
I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah. Yeah. When oh, I had a question to ask you. We were talking about the small lake stuff. Oh, when you got that the Sensei swimbait crawler, was that like your first introduction to crawlers, or have you fished like similar conventional baits, or was that the first, crawler bait that you had messed with?
Yeah, that was the first time I'd ever used a crawler. And I, talked to them about, how you want it to like sound or the pace you need to reel it at to get it that bloop, bloop, bloop,
Hmm.
sound and to it. But that was definitely the first time I'd used one. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding with that bait. That'll always be tied on for me because, I mean, I know it'll be a big fish killer for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
I don't know if you've listened to any of the a little bit of the older episodes where we have New England guys on and they talk about like the crawler and wake bite, the wake bite fish they catch, starting probably we're recording this in like the beginning of February, February 7th. Have you thought about like messing with the crawler or wake baits like early in the spring, like right after not necessarily ice out for you guys, but like super early when that water's super cold. Have you thought about doing that at all?
Yeah, I will for sure. Especially in these shallower lakes that I feel warm up a little quicker. But I will, and I've heard guys talk about catching, wake bait fish in the winter, which to me that blows my mind, but it can happen.
Hmm.
But I think I will definitely be throwing that Kairu crawler because I can see the drawing power I know that thing has. Will definitely probably catch some fish, and that's definitely been on my mind ever since last fall.
Yeah,
So I'm excited to get out there, man, for sure.
right. And being kind of a newer guy into the whole swim bait scene, have you kind of figured out how to tune the crawler, or have you not really had any issues with it? Because that's kind of the thing that people are always scared about is like, oh, a crawler has so many, kind of tuned, like finely tuned components. If a fish bends out my wings, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to mess with it. I don't know if I can figure it out. Have you kind of had to deal with that? And do you have any pointers for people who may be kind of skeptical or on the fence about it?
Yeah, so Austin and Ian, they gave me guidance on how to tweak the wings a little bit, just to roll them,
Mm-hmm.
just a hair. All it takes is just to, put a little pressure on them to so they have that forward lean, and so you're getting that right sound out of it and
Mm-hmm.
movement. But they did tell me exactly how to use that and how to, tweak them back if, after you catch some fish on it, they might get a little out of whack, or if you hit a dock or whatever, how to tweak them back just so they stay in that money zone,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
cool to.
right. Have you had like I haven't felt like held one personally, but do you have to mess with the wings every couple fish? Like do they bend out pretty bad or not pretty bad, but do they bend out after a couple fish or is it pretty solid and maybe, every like two trips you have to mess with it?
Yeah, on that bait, honestly, I think I've messed with them twice, and
Oh
I
wow.
I look at it, for sure to make sure they have the same kind of roll
Hmm.
as as got it when it was stock, but it's been a very durable bait, and even the wings on it are don't get manipulated very easily, which is
Right.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's something though you got to evaluate your baits for sure, because if they don't have the right action, or something's out of tune, they're not going to have the same effect or have the same drawing power, I guess.
Hmm. When you or I guess now, do you kind of have a cadence figured out with that bait, or are you more so the guy who maybe casts it out there and just has a slow, steady retrieve the whole time? Do you partake pauses or kind of walk us through what your full cast breakdown is with a crawler?
When I first got it, I was just, yeah, cast it out and then slowly retrieve just so you can hear those wings hitting the water. Um, but I did, I didn't know that, or I guess I wasn't aware that, the stop and go retrieve can be just as productive as just a straight retrieve. And on the fish that I didn't really get a lot of time to use that crawler until the weather, cooled off and it wasn't really top water season anymore. I only had like maybe a good month and a half. Um, but yeah, for the most part, all the fish I caught on that last the end of summer and early fall, I was just on straight slow retrieve. But I do look forward to messing with it more and giving it different cadences, because I've heard that a lot of guys get them on the stop and go retrieve
Yeah.
compared to a straight retrieve. So, and it is good to mess with your retrieve speed.
Hmm. Right. Have you like noticed how bigger fish tend to eat it rather than smaller fish? Like are big fish or like in your experience have the big fish like been super exaggerated, like huge toilet bowl blow up, suck the bait down, or is it more so maybe a nip where there's the smaller fish kind of do the opposite, or is it never really clear on the caliber of fish until you start to fight it a little bit?
And every single bite I've had on that thing, they want to kill it. Like it pisses them off for some reason.
Mm,
And so, like, my hookup ratio was super good on it. Um, but it was like violent hits. And like that to me is the epitome of like what you're going for. Like, that is so fun when, those big fish come up and just kill it and then, fish on. But I didn't really I caught some threes and fours on that bait, but for the most part, my bites were bigger bites. The timing I did use it,
hmm.
and then in September, I feel like in on that lake at least, that I had such good luck on the end of summer. Like I feel like in a way that time frame was perhaps like the fall feed on that lake, because like in September into October, like the fish were non-existent. I was like, man, boy, did I hit that at the right time. But obviously that varies from lake to lake.
Right, yeah. And before the crawler, you were kind of like from what I had seen on your page and stuff, you really liked like the TK, right? Or the K9?
So I bought. I got the K9 and two TKs off a working class zero drop, and I had Garrett Customs paint that K9 and a TK for me,
Mm-hmm.
and like a rainbow pattern. They're beautiful. The sad part of that is
Oh
that
no.
like I did a couple fish on that K9, um, but I didn't really use it as much as I thought I would.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a buddy of mine, big swim bait guy, that I actually was like, well, I'm gonna sell it. So I sold that K9 to him. And then the rainbow trout painted TK, I caught some nice fish on, some fives. And then I lost it. I don't know
Oh,
what happened to it. Yeah. Talk about it was kind of heartbreaking to know
yeah.
that, like, I don't know what I did with it, which is stupid. But the other one is just a silver one, like the stock paint TK. And I still have that, and I still use that. But like for me, when I'm going out, a lot of the time it's just been focusing like more on Citizen Six
Mm-hmm.
or wake bait. Like the candy gill from Sensi Swim Bait, it's a really good wake bait, and that red top worms gill wake I really like too. Um, but it's hard for me to like when I it's hard for me to put down wake sometimes. I get focused on just trying to get that top water bite when maybe I should be throwing a TK or other soft swim bait.
Yeah, yeah. When you first started fishing like the TK and kind of maybe a little bit of the K9, how were you fishing it out there? Were you fishing it like glide? Were you cranking it down? Were you dead walking it? And what was like the most productive way for you to fish the TK?
I was more cranking it down and then trying to get it down as deep as I could, and then I'd almost use it like a jerk bait,
Mm-hmm.
where I'd give it a pause, reel, pop, pop, pause, kind of like that cadence. And then I also caught some nice fish just dead walking it.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, like I feel like the Citizen Six is such a great bait that I've caught a lot of nice fish on that it's just like weight bait. It's hard for me to like stray from that sometimes too.
Yeah. So how are you fishing the Citizen Six? So, because when I first started fishing the Citizens, I would just bomb it out there. I'd count to three and I'd start reeling it in, kind of as if it was maybe like a square bill or something like that. I didn't understand why my fish weren't eating it, and it's because they're on the bottom. And once I started counting it down and just pretty much grinding bottom, I had a lot more success with it. So what was your kind of key to success with the Citizen Six? Because obviously you talked about the fish, you kind of caught on it for that first little while that you were fishing it, and that's like some insane results to have essentially right off the rip. What was working for you?
Throw it out there, let it hit bottom, and then I just start slowly reeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sometimes, if it was fishing shallow, I'd throw it up shallow, and like give it 5 second drop and then start slowly reeling it. But there were many times where I'd throw it out off of, I'm posted up on a line where it's 15 feet deep off some docks, let it hit bottom, start slowly retrieving, and then you feel that tick, and boom, that's the best. I love that. But for the most part, it was probably more closer to the bottom than like mid or upper surface levels.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, two Citizen Sixes last year on fish that broke me off. Who
Oh.
knows how big they were, but you know how that goes. It's
Hmm.
sometimes it happens. You get in the zone of like casting and not checking your stuff, and all of a sudden you hook up and there it goes because I don't know, your knot's trash or something. But lesson learned, of course.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Was were have you always been fishing the Citizen? I know you mentioned like a flashy beast hook earlier. Is that kind of how you standard fish a Citizen Six?
Yeah, that drip kit, with
Yeah.
the
Yep.
little bit screw into it. I really like those actually. Like once let's see, last year before last, I nailed a low sevens on a Citizen Six with that drip kit on it. And after that, it's kind of like, I don't know, the extra blade to me just seemed really appealing, and I like that. So usually how I like it, it's like, like using a spinnerbait is something that extra flash can't hurt, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah, and it feels like it just having that flash, it's more drawing power. Like you kind of have that like intuition in your mind that, oh, a fish is going to be able to pick this up way better than just that boot tail kicking around down there. Like it's going to be able to feel the vibration, and then it's going to see like, it throwing light and stuff like it does with a spinnerbait.
Absolutely. Like I like that feeling, like for me, like to have that extra bounce to a bait or vibration, like whether you're fishing a conventional bait that has that or a swim bait, like, or like a mod, like a drip kit. I like that for sure. Something about it just gives me confidence. I don't know if it sometimes it shies a fish away because it's
Hmm.
too much, and I'm sure that could be a possibility, but I think that's a good option.
Yeah, talked about it a gajillion times on the podcast. Like if you have confidence in your setup and in your baits, like the fish know, and they're so much more readily like ready to eat for some reason. If you even fake that you have confidence in it, it seems like it just works that much better for you.
Your confidence out on the water, I think, plays a huge role in just like where you fish, how you cast, and how you
Mhm.
work a bait.
Yeah,
I've
I think if
felt
you're
that.
super comfortable and loose and stuff, it translates like that bait maybe is swimming a little bit more erratic or a little bit more free than it would if you're like super timid trying to stick to a textbook like, oh my gosh, this is what Mike said on the podcast how to fish his Citizen 6, so this is how I need to do it exactly down to a T. Whereas you might go out there, bomb it out there, and you might be slow rolling it, and maybe you pick it up over a log and you speed it up for like one or two turns, and you're just having a good time, listening to music or whatever else it may be. It's like there's that much more room to freely fish, and it just seems like that just makes such the bigger difference for people.
It definitely does. Like, there's no doubt. I can't stress that enough. That like, and it's good to play with your bait too. Like see what works. Like if you're not getting any bites, like letting it drop to the bottom, then like jig it up and down. Like see what the fish want too.
Hmm.
Um, you know, it's something's not working, switch it up. That's what, I seem to do that often. That like if I'm not finding any bites, switch up your bait, find something else. Like if they don't want something, a reaction bite, then go finesse. And a lot of the time that pays off.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. When like when you do you fish on a boat often? Like, do you get to go out with your buddies on their boat at all, or is it pretty much primarily all kayak fishing for you?
My pedal kayak. I like to fish alone. I
Okay.
do like I love to go out. I've got a couple buddies that have nice bass boats that I love to get out on those, of course.
Hmm.
It's a lot of fun and you can cover so much more water, of course, and a ranger or skeeter. But there's something about like just being alone on my kayak that like I can get in my zone and I can be
Right.
my own captain wherever I want to go and fish somewhere, as long as I want. And a lot of the time, like I think I'm a better fisherman fishing alone because I'm dictating everything I do.
Hmm. Yeah. Like when you upgraded your kayak, or even like when you fish on somebody else's boat or something, and it sounds like you spend a lot of time in your kayak. Do you like is it all transferable from how you fight fish? Like before you had the like the normal side or normal like paddle kayak or whatever it was. Did you have to kind of switch how you, or did you kind of change how you fish because, oh, I don't have to worry about holding a paddle. I can use my feet to fight the wind, so I can be more concerned about my bait, or even like on a boat like where you're a little higher up, like on the hooks that are trying to keep the rod tip down in the water, whatever else that may be. Does it kind of transfer, or have you figured out something that works for pretty much any style or wherever you're fishing at?
I think getting a good fish in is a lot easier on a kayak because you're closer to the water and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
maybe it's just I feel that's my comfort zone. But like in a pedal kayak, if you hook a fish and it's going berserk on you, you can use the pedals to kind of get leverage on it by going in reverse, keeping it pinned, netting a fish or lipping it, whatever you want to do. For me, it's just a lot easier being that much closer to the water. Like, and I've experienced that many times versus being in a bass boat where you are higher off the water. Granted, a lot of guys just have it down and that's their thing and that's awesome. But and just even casting, like I feel like I can cast a lot better, like do my you know, side hand skips under docks and like work areas a lot better in my kayak. I can get into close areas and, pitch something under a dock or a lay down or whatever a lot more efficiently in my kayak. But I think a lot of the time that just comes with repetition and being out there, and getting comfortable with what you're using and how you're using it.
Yeah. I got a question for you. Being a kayak guy, do you prefer a CO2 vest, like the one that you pull to like blow up, or do you wear like a normal style PDF, like the foam floating ones?
What's it called? NRS, I think.
Okay.
It's a pretty slim fitting kite or life jacket.
Yeah.
That shirt really don't like anything bulky.
Hmm.
And I didn't, the dude I bought my kayak off of, he included this uh, life jacket with the kayak. And I just was like, oh, it works. I'm not going to go spend 120 bucks on the
Yeah.
life jacket when I have this one and it's fine. And, I'm not like if I'm fishing shallow or it's super calm out, a lot of the time I just take my cut or my life jacket off because I
Hmm.
feel like I'm good. I absolutely play it safe when it's the winter months or I'm in a bigger body of water and I just I feel a lot more comfortable knowing I'm protected.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. There was something I was going to ask you about the crawler. I cannot remember what it was. Oh, night fishing. Is night fishing something you do out there, or is it primarily like how we were talking about earlier, just having free time and getting out when you can? Do you ever try to make time to go out and try to experience all the nightlife out on the lakes?
Yeah, I have definitely night fished, and I haven't had great success doing it the times I have gone out. And like, I have a 5.5-year-old son, so if I know I'm staying up late, he always wakes up early. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I gotta also play it smart and be with it whenever I'm with him. But I haven't night fished as much as I'd like to. I have caught some nice fish, in the dark, but
Mhm.
that's something I would absolutely like to do more. Just because some fish are nocturnal feeders, right? So you could be targeting a different class of fish at night compared to daylight hours. But yeah, finding the time to do it is another thing.
Right. Yeah, and dude, it like it intensifies it by tenfold. Like you're going out there, you kind of, especially if it's a lake that you're familiar with, but maybe don't spend all your time on. It's like it's kind of an eerie feeling because you're like, okay, I know there's a dock here somewhere, but I don't want to turn on my headlamp, so I'm gonna make a cast, and boom, there goes your 150 crawler right into a pond side of a pontoon or whatever else it may be. It's like a completely different thing. From shore, I've noticed that it's not as bad. You kind of more times than not have like wide casting angles and can be a little bit more free with it. But from a vessel, it's a very interesting thing, especially if you hook a fish and being on the paddle board like I am, hook a good fish, you net it, and then you paddle over to shore, get off, take your pictures and stuff. It's like, man, it's a really weird thing, especially if you're out in the middle of nowhere in the woods and you're taking pictures and you're hearing, whatever it may be, walking behind you and stuff on the forest floor. It's eerie, but it always seems like it's worth it most times.
For sure. Yeah, there's been times I've been out in my kayak. One time I was out on this little lake and I was approaching this laydown and I heard something in the woods and I didn't have my headlamp on, but all of a sudden I hear something running down the log and it's a bobcat and it's like
Oh,
just snarling, like going buck wild, and it scared the hell out of me. I was like, oh my gosh, get me out of here.
yeah.
But there are different elements for sure fishing at night, and I can relate to that eerie feeling of like, man, like I don't know, it's just a different element for sure.
Yeah, you
But
guys have Bigfoot up there, so that's even more scary.
it's out there, man. You gotta watch your back.
Oh man. And that's the other thing, like being a wake bait guy or like a surface bait guy like you've been talking about and kind of like obviously how a lot of people night fish. there's something different to it. You bomb a cast out there, you start working your bait, and you hear a blow up rather in as like as instinctive as it is to swing on the fish because you can see the bite in the daytime and like you can see your bait disappear at nighttime. That is not how it is. You kind of have to reel in and see if like there's tension with that, or is the can you hear the bait like start to swim again? Did the fish miss it? Did it just quick hit it? Like it's crazy, and you don't really like you have to do it, I think, a decent amount of times to become pretty familiar with it and like become a an efficient nighttime angler. It takes a special person to get really good at it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even that being said, there's been times where like I have lost good fish or swung too early because I hear that splash,
Yep.
set the hook, and it's not there. Like I was too quick to set the hook. That's something that, it takes time and just going through those motions to learn that you got to let that fish take it and then swing.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
that's fun.
it's really fun and it's fun to do, but especially like your situation, having a kid and stuff, you can't always go. So you think about it, you're like, oh man, I should go night fish tonight, and then you go do it, and maybe you swing on 10 fish and you only land one. You're like, oh my gosh, like if I'm gonna do that again, I need to like go out 10 more times to have like a crazy, crazy efficient day with it. But again, like you said, you get to go out when you can, so you can't beggars can't be choosers. You can't be mad if you have to go out in one night and you don't get to go out for another 2 months or whatever else it may be.
Exactly. You got to remember, like, it's a bonus to catch a good fish.
Yeah.
Just getting out there, too, for me, is like therapy on the water. You're out there doing your thing, and it's good for me. It's like makes me tick. So that in itself can be a rewarding experience.
Hmm. And then like you're also going out there, and if you're not confident in the swim bait, you'll pick up a Senko or you'll pick up spinner bait or jerk bait or whatever else it may be. Whereas when guys start to skunk after 29 trips or 30 trips, it like really starts to weigh on them. Like they start, freaking out if they miss a fish or whatever else. And then here comes Mike in his pedal drive kayak, just having a joy, banging off a bunch of fish on docks with Senkos and stuff. Like it keeps you in such a better spirit that way too. And when you're like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna pick up the Citizen. I'm gonna fish it for an hour and a half, and if I don't catch any fish on it, I'm gonna set it down and I'm gonna pick up the jerk bait or whatever else. It's like, man, maybe there's a reason why guys who just go out and fish, for fun and fish or whatever, have such a better time than guys who are like swimmates all the time, 24/7. I need to catch the biggest fish every single cast type mindset.
Like I respect that mentality 100%. Like it's a grind when you commit to swim baits 100%. And I have done that,
Hmm.
and I have struck so many times where I was like, all right, like I'm not having fun. My objective is to come out here and catch fish. And I had to, there were many times I was going out and just casting bigger baits. And I was like, man, like I miss catching fish. Like I'm actually kind of frustrated with, going out and skunking. And I do understand that's part of the game for sure. But for me, I have confidence in probably a handful of other baits that aren't swim baits where I know that if there's a big fish around, you have a good chance of hooking them.
Hmm.
So uh, I do rely on that for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. What is this season looking like for you? Like, have you gotten to fish at all yet? Or like, is there kind of a break in the weather here within the next week or two that you're expecting to be able to get out on the water? Kind of what's 2025 looking like for you?
So far this winter, I haven't fished that much. I've gone out basically targeting smallmouth on a couple little lakes. And I actually have caught some nice, I've had a couple good days, jigging blade baits and dragging kiteks. So that's kind of scratched the itch for me so far this winter. In 2 weeks, I've got a actual bass tournament and, a bigger bass tournament and bass boats. So I'm going to be a co-captain on my buddy's boat with. So I'm looking forward to that. We've been going out on his boat a few times already this winter. Prepping for a tournament in a couple weeks. So But after that, man, once daylight starts getting longer, I'll definitely be hitting these lakes after work. And like I don't know, I feel like I did pretty good last year, so I'm gonna keep throwing, the crawler and these wakes and targeting these smaller lakes that I feel like, my goal is, of course, to try to catch a new PB and get into that 9 pound category. Um, that's kind of my goal for this year. Like, and I feel like with these newer baits that I had success on last year, I think I can do that. But time on the water will tell for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Is there any baits that you got over the last couple months that you're excited to kind of fish this season?
Man, that's a good question. I actually haven't I haven't bought any new swim baits this winter or anything. Like I've just been kind of gearing things towards these fishing for smallmouth. So of course I've been dropping money at Tackle Warehouse, with terminal tackle and smaller swim bait like Kitex and stuff. But right now I feel like I'm pretty much locked in with the baits that I have and like confidence baits, getting me through the spring and into summertime. But I'm sure that might change as the spring progresses, and I feel like I might need something else, but we'll see about that.
Yeah, and that's even another kind of mindset thing where you have what you have and you have what works. You're not going out there with a box of 50 baits and you like shuffling through baits, cutting off baits every two casts because you think, oh, maybe they're eating this since they're not eating this bait or whatever else it may be. Or where somebody goes out and they have 25 baits and they're like, well, man, I need to fish this particular bait all day because I bought this bait from the builder and he's really new. So maybe if I catch fish on his bait, he'll share a picture of it or whatever else it may be. You're just kind of like we said earlier, you're just going out there to catch fish, man, and have a good time, and that's freaking awesome, dude.
Thanks, man. That
That's
is the game plan
Yeah,
this year.
100%, man. That's kind of how I'm looking forward to 2025. Like just go out there and fish swim baits majority of the time, but not really having a care in the world on what it's on or like what it is exactly. If they're eating the crawler or if they want a, 6-inch glide bait, I'm not going to discriminate. Whatever I have, I got tied on or whatever I see in the box is what I'm going to fish. I'm not really brand specific at all. I don't really mind, friends with everybody. So if I can catch fish on a lot of people's baits, then that makes me happy.
Yeah, you bet, man. I'm with you on that. Like, I have what I have, and I feel like they're all confidence baits now that I've
Mhm.
used them enough so that they're gonna pull some fish.
Yeah, yeah, right. Heck yeah, dude. Well, wrapping it up here, what are the swim bait setups, swim bait go-tos for you?
Uh, right now, well, of course, the Sensi swim bait Kairu crawler. That's
Hmm.
gonna be always tied. My Citizen 6 swim bait. And as far as, swim baits, those are my two go-tos.
Yeah.
Um, for conventional stuff, of course, the SV3 spinnerbait has caught me so many nice fish that I'll always have that tied on. And then, for finesse fishing, like it's something I discovered this year, which might not make sense, but a drop shot wacky rig singo
Hmm.
for me, like, and I've caught a lot of big fish on that last year. And so I'll have those tied on. The Diva Glide with Sensi Swim Baits is also a really good fishy looking bait. I've caught
Yeah.
some nice fish on it. And then, red top worms, gill wake is a killer bait too that will also be going in between with, for my wake baits.
Hmm. What are the rod and reel setups you're fishing the swim bait stuff on?
I've got my Dobbins Fury swim bait rod with a Daiwa Tatula. My F5 Ghost Code has a Daiwa Tatula on it. And then my other setups are Dobbins Fury and Champions with Shimano Vanfords on them.
Heck yeah. What are you fishing like the same line on all of these, like for your crawler and for your citizen, or kind of what's your go-to for the line too?
I'm using Nogales nylon line,
Okay.
which had a buddy tell me that he really likes that, and I trust his words. So I've been using that for like a year, and I feel like it's a lot less stretchy than co-poly,
Mm.
and I like that. I feel like my hookup ratio is better on that. For like my other baits, I'm using. uh, fluorocarbon, P line fluorocarbon.
Yep.
Um, and then like my conventional setups, I always use like 20 pound Power Pro braid with like a 10 pound P line uh, fluorocarbon leader on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I'm a
and then
big fan of the P-line fluoro. That's what I run for my swim bait setup.
I like that for sure. It's never given me issues, and it's strong line, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's like decently cheap. You can buy like 500 yards of it for like 20 bucks. And like you said, I've never run across a bad spool or anything. So, whether it's luck or it's just decent line for the money. I mean, I have no complaints about it whatsoever.
If you know it works for you and you have confidence in it, and obviously doesn't break the bank, more the
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, dude, 100%. Like we said, the confidence thing earlier, huge, huge factor in everything as we've discovered on the show.
Definitely.
Well, heck yeah, man. What's the Instagram handle so guys can follow you? And then do you have a YouTube or anything else that you post any videos or anything on?
No, I don't have a YouTube, but my Instagram is wahbass83.
Perfect.
W.
Perfect. Yeah. As always, I'll put Mike's Instagram in the description so you guys can follow him on Instagram and you guys can scroll through and I mean it's an encyclopedia of all the fish that we've kind of talked about throughout the show and stuff and you guys can see all the crawler fish and all the Citizen Six fish and all and I mean if you scroll back far enough you'll see the lost but not forgotten TK and the K9 and everything too that we've talked about.
Uh,
Heck yeah, man. Well, I'm trying to think of anything else, maybe closing questions I have for you, but I can't think of anything. Maybe we'll get a couple of the Washington guys around and we'll do a round table like in the fall and talk about how your guys' year was and maybe what you guys found out like in certain parts of Washington and see if that stacked up true with the other side too. That I feel like that'd be pretty cool. Compare Eastern and Western Washington fishing over the course of the year.
yeah, definitely. Yes, I would be game for that.
Yeah, dude, that would be super fun, and I think there'd be some other Washington guys that would definitely be down for that, and I feel like a lot of people would be interested to hear that too, because Washington is such like a unique state that we've kind of all really learned a lot from the guys who have been on the show over the past years.
Yeah, there's some absolute hammers up here, man, that catch some fish that I aspire to catch. There's no doubt.
Right, right. Well, heck yeah, man. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap it up? I'm trying to think of anything, but I pretty much whatever I had popping in my head, I was just shooting questions at you for the last hour or so, and I appreciate you, spitting the answers back out to me.
Yeah, no, man, I appreciate you having me on, Adrian.
Yeah, dude, for sure. So we got the Instagram. Is do you have a GoPro or anything? Like, do you film any of your cast to catch stuff?
No, I don't, but man, I'd like to have some on Cast to Catch because, all I have them is in my memory, which is
Yeah.
awesome. But maybe at some point I'll get a GoPro just to, relive those catches
Yeah,
and
especially
share.
with the crawler, dude. Those crawler eats are probably absolutely insane when you have 7, 8 pounders eating the crawler like that.
Yeah, it's too fun. It's definitely memorable catches that hopefully can repeat in next coming years.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. Well, as always, I'll put Mike's Instagram in the description so you guys can go check out his page and follow him if you're not already. While you're on that Instagram app, make sure you guys are following the podcast Scales and Tails _ media on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We do the weekly uploads on YouTube, so you guys can listen and watch on there, as well as the weekly just the video uploads on YouTube as well. And then Instagram, we have all sorts of stuff we post throughout the week. So make sure you guys follow us on all those platforms if you're not already. And then if you guys haven't, make sure you give the podcast a rating or a review on your listening platform. It means a lot, helps us show out, kind of pushes it to everybody else along the algorithm. And then when you guys are listening to this, hopefully we'll have some new stuff on the website. So if we have that stuff by then, you guys know what I'm talking about. But if not, it'll be there in the soon in the future for you guys. But as always, thank you guys for listening. Mike, thank you for coming on, man. It was super fun to get a yet another Washington guy and kind of hear his whole swim bait story from the beginning. Maybe not necessarily that long ago, but you've done a lot of crazy stuff in the couple of years that you've been doing it, and I'm super excited to see what 2025 oh my gosh, what 2025 has in store for you this year.
No, thank you. It's fun being on.
Heck yeah, man. Well, as always, guys, thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you guys next time. See you guys.